Moscow, August the 25th, 1978. An earthquake hits KGB headquarters. In an extremely rare event, a KGB officer is arrested by his peers. Captain Orekhov's life is turned upside down.
Someone came to see me in my office and said, "Listen, there's a superior who wants to see you urgently." "Who's looking for me?" I asked. "The department deputy chief," he said. I think to myself, my God, the deputy chief, the top general. Why is he interested in me? They began talking, beating around the bush. And I said, "Why don't you come out and ask what you want? What do you want from me exactly?" They said, "Okay, we're conducting an internal investigation on you, and we'd like to ask you a few questions." "Please go ahead," I said. But to talk, they took me to Lefortovo prison. They put me into solitary confinement for 3 days, so that I could think things over, they said. Then they started to accuse me on specifics. "You've done this, you've done that, you warned this person and that person, you did this, you did that." I started to add up articles of the penal code in my head. At one point I thought, thank God I won't be shot.
Many of the KGB spies who went to the West became double agents. But there's only one case of an officer in charge of repressing dissidents who risked his life by joining their struggle for freedom. Viktor Orekhov is unique in the history of the Soviet Union. For 2 years, he protected dozens of dissidents, often without their knowledge. I went to Moscow to investigate his past and talk to dissidents and former members of the KGB. Viktor Orekhov left Russia leaving no trace or any possibility of returning home. After months of investigation in Moscow, Kiev, Ankara, New York and Los Angeles, I find Viktor Orekhov in the United States, where he lives an anonymous life, no identity, no telephone. Cut off from the world, without contact from family or friends, this man with an exceptional destiny has told his story to no one. For the first time since he left Russia, and after long reflection, Viktor Orekhov agrees to break years of forced silence, to leave his mark on history.
I didn't end up in the KGB by chance. I was raised in a family loyal to the Soviet state, its socialist ideals, and the Communist Party. That's why, when I finished my military service, I was considered as someone reliable, serious, and I was sent to the border guards. In the army, I was prepared to sit for examinations to enter the Kiev Polytechnic. Seeing that I was a serious student, my superior decided to send me to study at the KGB Institute. I began by studying Turkish culture and language, but also law, and especially techniques in intelligence and counterintelligence, everything that was top secret.
To be accepted into the prestigious KGB Academy is an honor, a privilege you don't refuse. This is where future spies are trained and sent to Soviet embassies in the four corners of the world. Others, like Viktor Orekhov, remain in Moscow, where they'll be in charge of ideological control.
I was extremely proud to find myself among KGB agents, as any young man would have been at the time. I knew that my work would involve great responsibility and that I would be part of the elite. Why do I say this? Everyone knew that the KGB was more important than any other state institution.
In 1970s Russia, the Soviets no longer believe in building a socialist Eden. There's growing unrest. Threats to the system not only come from the West, but also from within. KGB director Yuri Andropov responds by creating the 5th Department in charge of surveillance and the repression of dissidents. It was out of the question for Soviet authorities to allow the dissidents to have a voice. Viktor Orekhov and his colleagues at the KGB monitor the protesters' every move 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Author of a major work on the KGB's history, Evgenia Albats was one of the first to encounter Captain Orekhov and consult his file.
Orekhov was a loyal and accomplished Soviet. He was convinced that the Soviet system was perfect, the best in the world. He worked in the 5th Department and knew its advantages. KGB agents who worked in the 5th Department had the right to read forbidden literature for research, such as Solzhenitsyn or Orwell, the author of 1984 and Animal Farm. It was while reading Solzhenitsyn that Orekhov was deeply shocked.
This literature could have a strong impression on people who questioned and thought about things. I think that at the time I had reached a certain maturity. I could reflect on things. And naturally, these books had a great influence on me. In particular, the Gulag archipelago. I was very proud to be the first in the Soviet Union to read the last volume of this book. Reading it, you felt the extent of the violence the Communist Party exercised on its people. These books showed how our country was under heavy totalitarian rule. It was as if people were imprisoned. That was the feeling it left me with.
Russian people begin to feel a need to open up to the outside world. They become aware of the system's failures and view their leaders with increasing contempt. The KGB, as the armed wing of the Soviet system, is seen as evil. This starts to play heavily on Orekhov's mind. He begins to ask questions. Should we punish young people searching for knowledge? He's deeply touched by them, whether they're dissidents or simply curious, anyone who takes risks to read forbidden literature. Viktor Orekhov begins to falsify his reports.
You think you have a useful role in society, but at the same time you're aware of the horrible things you do. This weighed heavily on my mind. For example, one day, 2 young girls of the Komsomol were prosecuted for having read a book by Amalrik entitled "Will the Soviet Union Survive Until 1984?" It wasn't very serious, but for this minor offense, they could have been excluded from the Young Communist League, kicked out of the Komsomol, and lose their jobs at the Weather Bureau. This is what would have happened if I'd acted like a true KGB agent, but I refused to wreck their lives. I wanted to be more measured when dealing with these kinds of offenses. Also, I didn't want people to think that the KGB was an organization that shattered people's lives without a reason. So I explained how they should answer the accusations and wrote the deposition with them. They had to pretend that they bought the book by accident, instead of a thriller or a romance that they wanted to buy at the Dietsky Mir black market. I told them to say that someone had swapped this anti-Soviet book with the one they thought they had bought. They only discovered it when they arrived at work, and of course, it was too late to return it. Of course, they never read it or talked to anyone about it. How the KGB found out about the book, I don't know. Someone probably denounced them. I talked to the girls, and I made a false report so that the matter would be dismissed, be archived.
In order to improve its international image, the Soviet Union signs the 1975 Helsinki Accord, which commits it to respecting human rights. Now, those defending human rights in the USSR have a legal standing for their claims. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Andrei Sakharov, Anatoly Marchenko, Joseph Brodsky, Yuri Orlov, Vladimir Bukovsky, and Galina Vishnevskaya-Rostropovich, the leaders of the dissidents, strongly oppose political repression and demand freedom of expression. One of Captain Orekhov's jobs is to control demonstrations held by dissidents. The militia is in charge of the dirty work, but Orekhov and his colleagues at the KGB's 5th Department give the orders.
In totalitarian countries, in closed societies, the authorities never know what they should be afraid of. The dissident movement was very small, but the authorities couldn't ignore it. It was very difficult to know and assess to what point the dissidents succeeded with the general population. Did their petitions and their speeches have any resonance? Did their protests have support from the general public? Did they join? Because of these unanswered questions, the KGB worked to exterminate these movements before they took root.
Faced with this situation, the party's Central Committee and the head of the KGB orders the 5th Department to remove dissident figureheads. The writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn is evicted from the Soviet Union. Orekhov and his colleagues take turns monitoring Andrei Sakharov around the clock. The authorities want to regain control of the population with an iron fist. For General Bobkov, director of the 5th Department, the primary objective is to protect the regime from the West.
When they say that we were fighting against the dissidents, they are saying something completely false, because we never fought against people who thought differently to us. But there were people in the Soviet Union who came into contact with foreign intelligence services and with anti-Soviet organizations based in the West. And these people worked to undermine our constitutional order. They were fighting against authority. And when the 5th Department took action against the dissidents, it was to defend them, to save them. The West began to protest, saying that we were persecuting the dissidents.
General Bobkov, like his superior Yuri Andropov, considers the dissidents to be mentally ill. Besides arrests, imprisonment, and the gulags, the authorities use psychiatric hospitals as a political weapon. The method is simple: to declare those who think differently as insane. The treatment used on the dissidents includes torture, leaving them scarred for life. The decision whether to commit people or not was up to the KGB's Fifth Department. At the time, Colonel Igor Prelin was an agent working in counterintelligence.
If the Fifth Department had not been created in 1967, and if we had done nothing, then the disintegration of the Soviet Union would have started much earlier. The Fifth Department delayed the end of the USSR by 20 years.
The Soviet Union has a paradoxical way of rewarding its people. The best officers, those who achieve the best grades, are sometimes given a trip to capitalist hell. In 1973, Viktor Orekhov is sent on a mission to Japan.
The KGB had a reward system for their best officers. It was to send them abroad. I was sent with the Bolshoi Ballet and Theater Company to Japan. They went there each year for 2.5 months during the summer. They had a contract with a major Japanese TV station. We were sent as guardians, observers, you could say. As KGB agents, we were sent to monitor the performers. I saw nothing of what our propaganda was saying, that there was poverty everywhere, apart from a few very rich people. I never saw queues in Japan. You could go to a store, buy what you wanted, and go home. But in our country, everyone suffered from shortages. There was nothing on shelves, and the queues were intolerable. We could see that Japanese people weren't living the life that we had in the Soviet Union, or what was being portrayed by our media. This meant that the information we got at home was exactly the opposite of the truth, completely wrong.
Back from Japan, Captain Viktor Orekhov is assigned new cases. Among them is a computer scientist known for distributing banned literature. His name, Mark Morozov.
I received reports so that I could verify the risk posed by a number of people. They were isolated dissidents who openly protested against the government. Among the reports was a file on Morozov. I tried to gain his confidence, but this was mostly to get hold of banned literature that I was interested in. My superiors insisted that I recruit him and turn him into a KGB informant in order to obtain information on his relationships. I was sure that we weren't going to turn him into an informant. He was the sort of person who could accidentally give us information, but I was sure he wouldn't cooperate with the KGB. I borrowed some of his banned books, those that I would normally confiscate. What we should have done is the following: search his home and confiscate everything, which would be enough to put him in prison for a very long time. He began to trust me, and I said to him, as an honest man, I give you my word that I will return these books and not mention this to anyone.
The two men develop a friendship. Morozov, who trusts Orekhov, supplies him with forbidden literature. From now on, Orekhov's wish to do the right thing overrides any concerns for his own safety. He sees no future for a Soviet society based on fear and lies. He supports the dissidents' ideals and decides to help them. fully aware of the risks and without any illusion about the eventual outcome.
I would pick a phone number, knowing that it was under surveillance. I then went to a phone booth and calmly called, talking with a handkerchief over the mouthpiece to disguise my voice and avoid any possible inquiry at a later date. I'd say, "This is a warning. Tomorrow you will be searched." Or, "Your phone is tapped, but not that of such and such." Or, "You must notify your friends and tell them to get rid of the contraband literature." That's what I was doing.
Ludmila Alexieva is a very active dissident and one of the first to receive an anonymous call from Orekhov.
One day, someone I didn't know phoned me. I couldn't tell from the voice whether it was a man or woman because they were disguising it. They spoke with an aging voice. "Tomorrow you will have a pest control treatment." I replied, "What pest control? I didn't ask for one." And they said, "Think about it. Tomorrow you will have a pest control." I said, "I don't understand. I didn't ask for a pest control. I don't have rats. I don't have cockroaches." They continued, "But listen to me carefully." I hung up thinking it was a joke. Next morning they came to search my home. I didn't know who called me, but it was then that I realized that someone tried to warn me.
Alexander Podrabinek and his brother Kirill were in their 20s when they joined the dissidents.
It was a bizarre situation. You know, when they did a search, first they collected the documents, books, audio tapes. They sorted them, putting the things that interested them in one pile and what didn't interest them in another. As the search continued, the piles grew, but one pile grew faster than the other. I looked and I noticed that one of the KGB agents was not doing what he should be. I knew that certain documents could be of interest to their investigation, but he put them in the pile that was of no interest.
I started taking things and classified them in two different piles. I found something that interested us, I flicked through it, and I saw that it was exactly what we wanted. It was why we came here to search. First of all, I put it on the pile that didn't interest us. I then picked it up again, and I gave it to him. I told him, "This, put it where you want, it doesn't interest us." He looked at me strangely, as if he couldn't believe his eyes and ears.
I was really surprised. I thought to myself, this guy is crazy. Maybe he's not really a KGB agent. Or he's just young and incompetent. Years later, Orekhov told me that he did it deliberately because some documents could be dangerous. So he put them in the pile that was of no interest to the KGB.